Look, I'm Jake Slorp, and I've been a galactic journalist for over 3 centuries. I've seen everything from quantum wars to spacefaring potatoes. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened when humans finally got their superpower. It started, as most catastrophically hilarious events do, in a lab. Not a fancy lab, mind you, with gleaming quantum computers and holographic interfaces. No, this was the kind of lab where the coffee maker was held together with duct tape and hope. Dr. May Rodriguez was having what she'd later describe as one of those days. You know the type, where your socks don't match, you've got yesterday's lunch stuck in your hair, and you're about to accidentally rewrite the fundamental nature of human consciousness. "If I don't get more caffeine in my system," she muttered, reaching for her 13th cup of coffee that morning, "I'm going to start seeing quantum particles dance the Macarena." The universe, having a particularly mischievous sense of humor that day, decided to take that as a challenge. You see, in that specific lab, at that precise moment, 3 impossible things happened simultaneously. First, a quantum particle accelerator hiccuped. Yes, that's the technical term. Second, Dr. Rodriguez's coffee maker finally gave up its valiant fight against entropy. And third, a copy of Advanced Genetic Engineering for Dummies fell open to page 394, which, coincidentally, was about memory encoding in DNA. The resulting explosion wasn't particularly impressive. In fact, if you blinked, you'd have missed it. Just a small pop, a flash of blue light, and the distinct smell of burnt coffee beans mixed with quantum uncertainty. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been reading the fallen book while trying to save her precious coffee, blinked rapidly. "That's weird," she said, before realizing she could suddenly recite the entire book, word for word, including the copyright page and the author's awkward dedication to their pet hamster. Now, most people would panic upon discovering they'd suddenly gained the ability to perfectly memorize written information. Dr. Rodriguez, being a scientist and severely undercaffeinated, did the only logical thing. She grabbed every scientific journal in her lab and started reading. By the time her research assistant, Dr. Tom O'Reilly, arrived 2 hours later, she had memorized every scientific paper in the building, including the takeout menus in the break room. "Morning, May," Tom said, then stopped dead in his tracks. "Why are you surrounded by every piece of paper in the lab?" "Did you know?" she replied, not looking up from a paper about quantum entanglement in coffee molecules, which, ironically, she'd written 3 years ago and completely forgotten about, "that you misspelled quantum 14 times in your last paper. Also, your citation format was inconsistent." Tom, who prided himself on his attention to detail, frowned. "That's impossible. I checked that paper 20 times before submission." "Page 4, paragraph 2, line 3, May recited, eyes closed. Quote, "The quantum fluctuations suggest." You really should have used spell check. What happened next was a blur of activity involving more scientists, several government agencies, and an unfortunate incident where Dr. Rodriguez accidentally memorized a classified document that someone had carelessly left in the printer queue. The government, doing what governments do best, tried to keep everything under wraps. This worked about as well as trying to hide a supernova behind a pair of sunglasses. Within days, it became apparent that whatever had happened in that lab wasn't isolated to Dr. Rodriguez. The effect was spreading, passing from person to person like a particularly aggressive chain letter. Scientists theorized it had something to do with quantum entanglement and human DNA. Dr. Rodriguez just called it the coffee incident, and kept insisting that if they'd just given her a better coffee maker in the first place, none of this would have happened. The first sign that things were about to get really interesting came when a college student in Nebraska accidentally memorized the entire internet after a particularly intense study session. The second sign was when humanity collectively realized they could now read, memorize, and perfectly recall any information they saw. The third sign was when the aliens finally decided to make contact. But that's getting ahead of the story. First, let me tell you about the look on Ambassador Zexthor's face when he discovered that the supposedly primitive species he'd been sent to evaluate had suddenly developed perfect photographic memory. I've seen black holes with cheerier expressions. And as for what happened next, well, let's just say the Galactic Library would never be the same again. Let me paint you a picture of the exact moment the galactic community realized they'd made a terrible mistake. There's Ambassador Zexthor, standing in his perfectly pressed diplomatic robes, preparing to deliver his carefully rehearsed "Welcome to the galactic community, you primitive but charming species" speech. And there's Dr. Rodriguez, casually flipping through the 1,000-page preliminary cultural exchange document they'd just handed her. "Oh, interesting," she said, closing the book after exactly 43 seconds. "You have a fascinating approach to quantum mechanics, but there's a small error in your calculations on page 847. I wish I had an extra set of eyes just so I could have properly captured Zexthor's expression. His facial tentacles went through all 5 stages of grief in about 3 seconds. "That's impossible," he sputtered, his translator struggling to convey the right mix of diplomatic politeness and absolute horror. "You couldn't have possibly read—" "Would you like me to recite it?" Dr. Rodriguez offered helpfully. "I particularly enjoyed the section about proper tentacle etiquette in formal dining situations, though I have some questions about the mathematical proofs in Appendix C." The junior diplomatic aide, Vernax, fainted dead away. Nobody noticed because they were too busy watching Zexthor's facial tentacles tie themselves into what I believe humans call a pretzel. The next few hours were pure chaos. The diplomatic team tried desperately to collect every piece of documentation they'd brought, only to discover that the humans had already read and memorized everything, including the classified appendices, and the lunch menu, and someone's shopping list. "This is unprecedented," Zexthor declared during the emergency conference call with the Galactic Council. "They're absorbing information faster than a Quatlovian brain sponge." "Did he just compare us to brain sponges?" whispered Tom to May. "Page 724 says that's actually a compliment in their culture, though I'm not sure he meant it as one." The Galactic Council's response was swift and predictable. They panicked. First came the attempted information quarantine, which worked about as well as using a paper umbrella in a supernova. They tried to restrict access to the galactic database, only to discover that humans had already downloaded and memorized most of it through what they thought was a securely encrypted connection. "In our defense," said the human IT specialist responsible, "your encryption key was written on a sticky note attached to the main console." The Council then tried to implement what they called controlled information sharing. This led to what humans would later call the Great Database Incident, where a bored teenager in Tokyo accidentally memorized the entire history of galactic civilization while looking for Spacecat videos. Ambassador Zexthor's reports to the Council became increasingly desperate. Day 5. "They've memorized all our languages. All of them. Including the dead ones. Including the ones we forgot existed." Day 7. "They're correcting our historical records. With citations." Day 12. "They've started teaching our own scientific theories back to us. With improvements." Day 15. "They're still drinking that horrible brown stimulant they call coffee. I'm beginning to suspect it's somehow connected to their powers." The final straw came during what was supposed to be a simple cultural exchange meeting. Representative Krathal was giving a presentation on the grand history of the Galactic Council, only to be politely interrupted by a human historian who pointed out several inaccuracies in the account. The historian then proceeded to recite, from memory, the original untranslated documents from 12,000 years ago. Krathal had to be escorted out when the historian started correcting the pronunciation of their own ancient language. Meanwhile, Dr. Rodriguez had become something of a celebrity, though she seemed more interested in finally getting a properly functioning coffee maker. "Look," she told me during an interview, All I wanted was a decent cup of coffee. Instead, I accidentally gave humanity perfect recall and threw the galactic community into chaos. But at least now I can memorize every coffee recipe ever created. The Galactic Council was facing an unprecedented situation. A species that could not only absorb information at an alarming rate, but could actually understand and improve upon it. Their carefully maintained monopoly on knowledge was crumbling faster than a cookie in a black hole. And speaking of black holes, nobody was prepared for what happened when humans got their hands on the advanced physics databases. But that's a story that involves 3 quantum physicists, a rubber duck, and the complete reorganization of our understanding of space-time. Though if you think that's bad, wait until I tell you about what happened at the Great Library of Nexus Prime. I still get stress tremors in my recording tentacles just thinking about it. There are moments in galactic history that change everything. The invention of faster-than-light travel, first contact with intelligent life, the time someone taught a Glorbon to yodel. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what happened at the Great Library of Nexus Prime. Picture, if you will, the most magnificent library ever constructed. 5,000 floors of pure knowledge, stretching up into the perpetually sunset-tinted atmosphere of Nexus Prime. The accumulated wisdom of over 10,000 civilizations, carefully catalogued and maintained by the most obsessive compulsive librarians in the known universe. Krathax, the head librarian, had held his position for 300 years. He'd survived 2 quantum wars, a temporal paradox, and that one time someone returned a book with coffee stains. But nothing in his extensive career prepared him for the arrival of the humans. "Welcome to the Great Library," Krathax announced to the first human delegation, his voice echoing through the vast entrance hall. "We have prepared a 6-month orientation program to help you navigate our basic catalog system." "Oh, finished it," interrupted Dr. Rodriguez, who had already memorized the entire library manual, including the emergency evacuation procedures, and Krathax's personal notes about which cleaning droids gossip during their maintenance cycles. Krathax's eye stalks twitched. "Impossible. The manual is 12 million pages long." "Yes, and you really should update page 8394721, she replied. "The reference system for quantum metaphysics was changed last century." That's when Krathax made his first mistake. He assumed they were bluffing. His second mistake was challenging Dr. Rodriguez to recite the manual backward. His third mistake was fainting when she did exactly that, while simultaneously correcting a millennia-old translation error in the ancient Zorgak section. What followed was what humans would later call the Great Reading Spree, and what the library staff would refer to as the incident we do not speak of. Imagine, if you can, hundreds of humans wandering through the library, their eyes scanning pages at impossible speeds. They went through restricted sections like tourists at an all-you-can-eat buffet. The more the staff tried to stop them, the faster they read. "They're in the forbidden knowledge section," one librarian screamed. "Which one?" Krathax asked, already knowing the answer. "All of them!" The security systems were useless. How do you stop someone who's already memorized the entire security manual, including the classified appendices about secret passages? Especially when said person is casually pointing out that your security codes haven't been updated since the last galactic revolution. The humans were unstoppable. They absorbed ancient prophecies, quantum equations, and restricted engineering schematics. They even memorized the cafeteria menu for the next 1,000 years. Then came the incident with the Forbidden Vault. Now, every good library has a Forbidden Vault. It's practically a requirement. This one contained knowledge deemed too dangerous or complicated for most species to comprehend. The door had 10,000 locks and was guarded by AI systems programmed to detect unauthorized neural patterns. It took the humans exactly 12 minutes to get in. "In our defense," Tom explained later to a twitching Krathax, "you really shouldn't write down the master password and stick it under the keyboard, even if it is in microscopic quantum encrypted text." Inside the vault, they found the most dangerous texts in the galaxy: ancient weapon designs, universe-ending equations, a complete collection of really bad poetry written by the Emperor of Xenon VII. "Fascinating," was Dr. Rodriguez's only comment as she speed-read through a book that supposedly drove its last reader to convert their entire civilization into a quantum puppet show, though the author's grasp of semicolon usage is questionable. By the time Krathax managed to organize an emergency response team, the humans had already read everything. They were sitting in the library's cafe, drinking their ever-present coffee and discussing improvements to several universe-ending devices. "You know," one physicist mentioned casually, "if you adjust the quantum resonance in this apocalypse machine design, it could also make really good toast." The emergency meeting of the library board that followed was historically significant for two reasons. First, it was the only time in recorded history that Krathax was seen without his ceremonial reading glasses. Second, it was where humans were simultaneously banned from and hired by the library. "We can't stop them from reading everything," Krathax explained to the board, his eye stalks drooping in defeat. "We might as well employ them to organize it." And that's how humans became the galaxy's most efficient librarians. Though Krathax still flinches whenever he sees someone drinking coffee near the ancient scrolls. But if you think that was chaos, just wait until I tell you about what happened when humans started attending galactic universities. I've seen black holes less destructive than a human graduate student with perfect recall and a point to prove. I've covered wars, natural disasters, and that one time a sentient cloud decided to become a stand-up comedian. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what happened when humans entered galactic academia. Picture the most prestigious university in the galaxy, the Central Institute of Advanced Knowledge on Academica Prime, 10,000 years of tradition, professors who had literally evolved beyond the need for sleep just to spend more time researching. A campus so vast it had its own weather system. Enter Professor Nexvac, holder of 47 degrees, author of the definitive work on quantum temporal mechanics, and about to have the worst day of their 300-year career. It started with a human student named Jack Martinez raising his hand in Nexvac's legendary Introduction to Advanced Everything class. This class typically took 5 years to complete. Jack had been there for 3 days. "Excuse me, Professor," Jack said, "but I think there's an error in your theorem from 200 years ago. The one about quantum temporal flux in nonlinear dimensions?" Nexvac's upper brain stem throbbed. "That theorem has been peer-reviewed by the finest minds in the galaxy." "Yes," Jack agreed cheerfully, "and they all missed the semicolon on page 3427 that changes the entire meaning of the quantum equation. Also, your research from 80 years ago actually disproves your own theorem. Would you like me to cite the specific paragraphs?" The sound Nexvac made was later described as what you'd get if you crossed a quantum hiccup with an existential crisis. But that was just the beginning. Across the galaxy, human students were wreaking havoc in the hallowed halls of learning. They were completing 1,000-year degree programs in weeks. They were correcting texts that had been considered infallible for millennia. They were proving theorems that weren't supposed to be provable. "They're evolving too fast," one professor complained to the academic council. "Yesterday, a human student corrected my pronunciation of my own species' ancient language. Then they suggested improvements to our writing system. The council called an emergency session, which had to be postponed because a group of human graduate students had already booked the meeting room for a quick study of every scientific paper ever written. Then came the infamous Wikipedia upload incident. No one quite knows who gave humans access to the Galactic academic database. But somebody did, and within hours humanity had not only downloaded and memorized the entire thing, but had also started adding citations, correcting errors, and suggesting improvements. "Did you know," Dr. Rodriguez mentioned casually during a faculty meeting, "that there are exactly 12,473 mathematical errors in the database? Also, someone recorded their grocery list in the middle of a quantum physics proof about 3 centuries ago. Professor Nexvac, who had spent their entire career building that database, had to be sedated with extra-strength quantum stabilizers. The breaking point came during the annual Galactic Science Fair. Traditionally, this was where the finest minds in the galaxy presented their life's work. This year, human undergraduates were showing up with complete revisions of fundamental universal laws they'd worked out over coffee. "It's quite simple," explained a human student to a crowd of shocked professors. "We just took everything ever written about physics, cross-referenced it with every observation ever made, and spotted the patterns. Anyone want to see our improvements to the theory of everything? We wrote it this morning." The Academic Council finally admitted defeat when a team of human doctoral students accidentally solved time travel while trying to figure out how to make their coffee maker work faster. "We have two options," announced the head of the council to an emergency session. "Either we ban humans from academia entirely." There was a pause as everyone remembered what happened when the library tried to ban humans. "Or we completely restructure our entire educational system." And that's how the galaxy's most prestigious universities found themselves being reorganized by species who'd only recently figured out how to leave their own solar system. Professor Nexvac eventually recovered from their breakdown and now teaches a popular course called How to Deal with Humans, Knowing Everything. The course materials consist mainly of stress management techniques and emergency procedures for when humans start improving your life's work. But the real chaos was yet to come, because that's when the Galactic Council realized they needed to do something about this situation. And if there's one thing guaranteed to make any situation more complicated, it's bureaucrats trying to solve it. Though I have to admit, watching humans completely reorganize galactic civilization while perpetually caffeinated was the highlight of my journalistic career. Let me tell you about the most entertaining government meeting in galactic history. Picture this. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, a room so vast it has its own orbital system, packed with representatives from every known civilization. And at the center of it all, a human delegation calmly drinking coffee, while the entire galaxy tried to figure out what to do with them. "The situation is unprecedented," declared High Counselor Ixthor, no relation to our favorite ambassador, though equally prone to tentacle tangling when stressed. "Humans have accessed and memorized approximately 97.3% of all galactic knowledge." 98.7%, corrected Dr. Rodriguez, not looking up from her coffee. "We finished the rest while you were calling this meeting to order." The sound of thousands of alien species face-palming, or their species equivalent, echoed through the chamber. The Council had prepared a 40,000-page report on the human information crisis. Unfortunately, their human guests had read and memorized it before the first page was officially presented, and had already prepared a 100,000-page response complete with corrections, citations, and helpful suggestions for improving the Council's document formatting. "We could try restricting their access," suggested one councillor. The chamber burst into laughter. Even the traditionally stoic quantum monks chuckled. "They'd have to forget everything they've already learned," pointed out another councillor. "And has anyone figured out how to make humans forget things?" "We can't even make them forget their coffee orders," muttered Ambassador Zexthor, who had developed an eye-stalk twitch since his first contact mission. That's when Dr. Tom O'Reilly, who had been quietly solving a millennium-old mathematical proof on his napkin, raised his hand. "Have you considered," he said, "just asking us to help?" The silence that followed was so profound that you could hear quantum particles questioning their life choices. "Help," repeated High Counselor Ixthor, as if the word was written in a language he'd never seen before, which was impossible, as humans had already translated and improved every known language in the galaxy. "Well," Dr. Rodriguez chimed in, setting down her coffee cup, "we've got all this knowledge. We understand it. We can cross-reference it instantly. And contrary to what your report suggests on pages 7403 through 8591, we don't actually want to take over the galaxy. That sounds like way too much paperwork." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked the High Counselor, his tentacles uncurling slightly. "Make us your librarians, your teachers, your living archives," she suggested. We're really good at organizing information, and we've already color-coded your entire historical database. Also, we fixed that really annoying bug in the search system that's been there for the last 3 centuries. The Council deliberated for approximately 3 minutes, a new record in galactic governmental efficiency, before reaching a conclusion that would change the course of history. And that's how humanity became the official knowledge keepers of the galaxy. The Great Library was reformed with humans as its primary archivists. The universities were restructured with human teachers helping other species learn at their own pace. Even the galactic database was reorganized, with humans serving as living backup systems. They established the human memory banks, the most secure and efficient information storage system in history. Need to know about ancient Zorgaxian poetry? Ask Linda from accounting. Want to understand 11-dimensional quantum mechanics? Bob in IT can explain it, probably while fixing your computer. The greatest irony? The species that many had considered too primitive to join galactic society became its greatest teachers and protectors of knowledge. Of course, there were some interesting side effects. Coffee became the most valuable commodity in the galaxy, with some species convinced it was the source of human powers. The phrase, "let me ask a human," became the most common solution to any problem. And the galactic standard for document formatting was revolutionized because, as Dr. Rodriguez put it, if we have to memorize everything, it might as well be pretty. Professor NXVAC eventually wrote a new thesis titled The Unexpected Evolution of Human Galactic Relations, a Personal Journey from Breakdown to Acceptance. It became required reading across the galaxy, though humans politely pointed out 3 typos in the first edition. As for Dr. Rodriguez, she finally got her properly functioning coffee maker. Actually, she got several thousand of them, gifts from grateful species across the galaxy. She also received the prestigious title of First Accidental Revolutionary of Human Evolution, though she maintains that she was just trying to stay awake during a late-night lab session. And me? Well, this story made my career as a journalist, though I still can't get used to humans correcting my articles before I even finish writing them. The galaxy learned some valuable lessons. Never underestimate a species with a caffeine addiction. Perfect memory is both a blessing and a chaos generator. And sometimes the best solution to a crisis is just to embrace the madness. Oh, and one final note. If you're ever visiting Earth, don't ask about the time someone tried to switch the entire species to decaf. Some stories are too horrifying even for galactic history.